My viewers, this is a story of Elizabeth who thought she was bringing $1 million to save her husband. She didn't know she was bringing it to trade her life for another woman. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Elizabeth had been waiting at the restaurant table for 2 hours. The candles had burned down to stubs. The wine was untouched. The waiter had come by 3 times with that carefully neutral expression. She told herself Minji was stuck in traffic, his phone had died. She told herself this was just one of those nights, the kind that felt heavy at the time and meant nothing by morning. She had told herself a lot of things in the last 15 years of marriage, and she was good at it by now. Very good. The dress she'd worn was the blue one. He had told her once that she looked best in it. She believed him and ordered a second glass of the wine they always ordered, and she sat across from an empty chair and waited. At some point, she stopped watching the door. When her phone finally lit up, it wasn't Minji's name on the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered. The voice on the other end was calm, almost bored, the voice of a man. "Your husband is with us," he said. "If you want him back, you'll need $1 million cash. You have 4 hours." The line went dead. Elizabeth didn't panic. That surprised her, even as she sat there holding the phone. She didn't scream or cry or run into the street. She just sat very still for a moment, looking at the burned-down candles, at the wine she hadn't touched, at the empty seat across from her. Then she reached into her purse and started making calls. She had money. That had never been a problem. What most people in her life didn't know, what Minji himself didn't fully understand, was just how much money Elizabeth actually had access to. She had walked away from her family a long time ago, from the empire and the weight of it, because she had believed in something more. But the accounts she'd kept were still very much alive. $1 million was not a small amount, but it wasn't impossible either. By 1 a.m., she had it. She followed the instructions exactly. An abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place that appears in 100 crime films and somehow still exists in real life. She drove herself. She didn't call the police. The captor had been very clear about that. The warehouse was cold inside. 3 men stood near the center of the floor, and behind them, in the shadows, she could see 2 figures seated in chairs. 2. She had expected one. Minji was on the left. Even from across the floor, she could see he was unhurt. Disheveled, wrists bound, but unhurt. He was watching her walk in with an expression she couldn't quite read. And next to him, a woman Elizabeth had never seen before. Young, beautiful in a sharp, deliberate way, dark hair falling loose from whatever style it had been in before this night ruined it. The woman was crying. Her mascara had tracked dark lines down her cheeks, and she kept pulling against the zip tie at her wrist like she believed. If she pulled hard enough, it would give. "You brought the money," the lead captor stepped forward. "I brought it," Elizabeth said. 1 million, per person. She stopped walking. "What?" $1 million per hostage. He said it like he was reading off a receipt. "You have 2 hostages. That's $2 million. Elizabeth looked at the bag in her hand. "I only brought enough for my husband. I can only let the woman go if someone stays in her place," the lead captor said. The woman in the chair made a sound, a sharp, desperate sob. "Please," she said. "Please don't leave me here. I can't stay here, please." Elizabeth didn't know this woman. She didn't owe her anything. She looked at Minji, and he was already looking at her with those eyes. The ones she had fallen in love with 15 years ago, when she was 22 years old and certain she understood what mattered. The ones that had convinced her to walk away from everything her family had built. "Liz," his voice was low. "Liz, listen to me." "Minji." "I'll go find the money," he said quickly. "I just need to get out of here. I know people. I can get another million within a day, maybe 2, if you just stay in her place. She's innocent and today is her 30th birthday. Can't just leave her in this situation," Minji said temporarily, "just until I come back." She looked at him for a long moment. The warehouse was cold, and the men behind him weren't moving, and the woman beside him kept crying in that raw, exhausted way that meant she'd been crying for a while. "I'll come back for you. I swear to you, Elizabeth, I will come back. I promise." She believed him. That is the thing she would think about later, in the long, quiet months that followed. She had believed him. She looked into his eyes and heard his voice and felt the particular pull of 15 years of shared life, and she had believed him. She set the bag down on the concrete floor. "Fine," she said. "I'll stay." Minji took the woman by the arm the moment they released him. He walked her toward the door. He didn't hesitate. He didn't slow down. Elizabeth stood still and watched his shoulders, the back of his suit jacket, the way he moved with purpose and speed toward a door she had just walked through. The woman stumbled once and he steadied her without breaking stride. The door didn't slam. That was the thing she would remember later. It just swung shut, slow and quiet, like it was closing on an ordinary room at the end of an ordinary night. If you're feeling what Elizabeth is feeling right now, you already know this story isn't over. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what she does next. She waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. A knock. His voice on the other side of the door. Some sign that he had stopped walking, turned around, remembered her. The warehouse was cold. The three men behind her settled into a silence that waiting was simply part of the job. The door didn't open again. She told herself he was already on the phone, already calling in favors, moving fast, doing what he'd promised. She was good at telling herself things. 15 years of marriage had made her excellent at it. But somewhere beneath all of that, in a place she didn't look at directly, she already felt it. The specific weight of something that won't be coming back. He didn't come back in 2 days or in 2 weeks. He just never came back at all. 3 years is a long time to be somewhere you don't want to be. Elizabeth won't talk much about those years. People who have asked get a short answer or no answer at all. What she will say, what she said once to her father on the 3rd night after she came home, is that she survived it, that the captors weren't cruel, not exactly. They were businessmen in their own ugly way. A live hostage has value. She was fed. She was given books, eventually. She had time, more time than she'd ever had in her life, to sit inside her own thoughts. At first, that was the hardest part. Elizabeth had spent her entire adult life moving. From one thing to the next, from one choice to the one after it, the decision to leave her family, the decision to love Minji, the careful building of a life she had chosen over the life she'd been given. Stillness had never been her nature. But stillness was all she had now. In the beginning, she spent the hours waiting, just waiting, constructing reasons. He was dealing with the police. He was pulling together funds. He was fighting through some bureaucratic wall she couldn't see from inside this building. He was coming. He would come. The 3rd month, she stopped constructing reasons. Not because she accepted it. She wasn't ready to accept anything yet, but because she had used up every version of the story she could invent, and none of them had produced a knock on the door. And she was too honest with herself, had always been too honest with herself, underneath everything, to keep telling a story the evidence didn't support. She started reading. Whatever they brought her. History, mostly. Business. The occasional novel. She read with the focus of someone who has understood, finally, that the mind is the only room she can control. She thought. She planned, even when she had nothing to plan toward. She turned her situation over in her mind the way her father had once taught her to turn over a business problem from every angle, looking for the things she might have missed. By the 2nd year, she understood the situation completely. By the 3rd, she understood herself. She had made decisions from love, and love had left her in a warehouse. That was the fact of it, clean and cold, the way facts always are when you stop arguing with them. It didn't mean love was wrong. It meant she had given it to someone who treated it as a tool, and the only right response to understanding a mistake that completely was to make certain it never happened again. Her family found her in the 3rd year. She still doesn't know exactly how. They had resources, connections, a reach that had nothing to do with ordinary business. They paid. They brought her home. And when she walked back into the house she had grown up in, the marble floors, the high ceilings, the smell of the place that hadn't changed at all, her father looked at her for a long time without speaking. And then he held her. And that was the first time in 3 years that Elizabeth allowed herself to cry. She didn't cry about the warehouse. She didn't cry about the cold or the waiting or the books or the silence. She cried because she already knew, before anyone told her, what she was going to find out. The confirmation came 3 days after her return. A family associate laid a folder on the table in front of her. photographs, financial records, newspaper clippings from the society pages. Minji had not spent those 3 years looking for her. He had spent them building a life. The woman from the warehouse, her name was Sira, had moved into Elizabeth's home within 2 months. By the end of the first year, Minji's business had expanded significantly. New investments, new partners, a new social circle that didn't include anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions about his missing wife. They were photographed at parties together, at charity dinners, at the kinds of events Elizabeth used to attend on his arm back when she still believed the man she married was real. Elizabeth looked at every photograph, the ones where they were smiling, the ones where they were looking at each other, the ones from events she recognized, events she had attended herself, in a different life, where they stood in rooms that felt like they belonged to them now. She didn't throw anything. She didn't shout. She just turned the pages slowly all the way to the end, and then she closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. "Tell me about the scheme," she said. "Who planned it?" The associate hesitated. "Tell me." The answer was Sira. The investigation her family had quietly run over the past 3 years, because even while Elizabeth sat in that warehouse, her family had not stopped working pointed directly at her. The whole thing had been staged. Sira had connections to the men who ran it. The timing, the demands, the specific structure of the ransom, built to require someone to stay behind, all of it had been designed, engineered, to give Minji a reason to leave Elizabeth in that room. And to give herself a reason to walk out with him. The only question was whether Minji had known. Elizabeth thought about it for a long time. That night, after everyone left, she sat in the chair by the window of her childhood bedroom, the same chair she had sat in at 16, deciding things, and she turned it over in her mind. She thought about the way he'd looked at her in the warehouse, the rehearsed ease of his words. "I'll come back for you, I promise." She thought about how quickly he took Sira's arm. She decided it didn't matter. Her father wanted to move against them immediately, but Elizabeth told him to wait. "There's a better way," she said, and she explained it. She laid it out at the dining room table, the way he had once laid out strategies for her when she was young, calm, methodical, nothing wasted. She told him what she wanted and why the timing mattered and what outcome she was looking for. Not revenge, not destruction. Accountability. Done in a room full of witnesses, done in a way that couldn't be undone. Her father listened. He didn't interrupt once. On the other hand, Minji had recently submitted a request to secure a partnership with the KO Group, which would rise his career to greater height, but little did he know that the one-person signature to make that happen was Elizabeth, because she was the heir of KO Mafia family. She was the Mafia boss. The same person Minji have tried for years to meet and stage a speech that will help his partnership deal secured. When she finished, her father was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," Elizabeth said, "I have." What most people in the city's business world knew about the KO family empire was this. It was old, it was powerful, and it was untouchable. What they didn't always know was that the current head of the family, the person whose signature sat at the bottom of every major contract the empire authorized, was Elizabeth. She had officially reclaimed her position as heir 2 weeks after returning home. The transition had been quiet and quick. Her father was aging, and the family had been waiting for her return longer than anyone outside had understood. She stepped back into the role like a room she had left the lights on in. The pen felt familiar in her hand when she signed the first document. She hadn't expected that. 15 years away. And her signature still looked exactly the same. It was a different Elizabeth who sat at the head of that table, though. The one who had walked away 15 years ago had been softer, full of belief that love was worth more than power, that a life built around one person was richer than a life built around an empire. She didn't regret that version of herself, but she didn't let that version of herself make decisions anymore either. The KO family held their gala. Most important business families were invited to the KO family gala 3 months after her return. It was held in the grand hall of the family estate, a building that had stood for 60 years, marble floors, chandeliers, the kind of event that people in this city waited their whole careers to be invited to. Minji had been waiting for this invitation for years. The deal he was chasing, a partnership that would take his business from successful to untouchable, required the KO family's backing, their authorization, their signature. He had been working through intermediaries for months, and he had finally got himself on the guest list. He arrived at the gala in a black car, Sierra on his arm, wearing a suit that had cost more than most people made in a month. He looked good. He knew it. He smiled at people he half recognized and shook hands with men whose names he was still learning. And he moved through that grand hall with the easy confidence of someone who believed, completely and without question, that tonight was the night his future locked into place. He was looking for the head of the KO family. He had been told it was an older gentleman, stepping back from things, but still present enough to close important deals personally. He asked a server. The server pointed toward the far end of the room. Minji looked up, and he stopped moving. Elizabeth stood at the center of a small circle of people who all looked at her the way people look at someone they do anything not to disappoint. She was wearing dark red, a color she'd always known suited her, and her hair was up, and she was smiling at something one of the men had said. She looked completely at ease. She looked like she had been standing in rooms like this her entire life, because she had. Minji went pale. Sierra felt his arm tighten under her hand. She looked up at him, then followed his gaze across the room. Her face changed. Elizabeth hadn't looked at them yet, but the way she carried herself made it clear she knew exactly where they were. She finished her conversation, excused herself gracefully, and then turned. Her eyes landed on Minji first, then moved to Sierra, and stayed there a beat longer than was comfortable. Just long enough for Sierra to understand that nothing about tonight was accidental. She walked toward them slowly. Minji's mouth opened. He closed it. He tried to find some version of this moment that didn't immediately destroy him, some angle, some explanation, some tone of voice that could hold back what was already coming. Elizabeth, Mr. Minji. Her voice was pleasant and professional. I'm glad you could make it tonight. He stared at her. You're the head of I am. She smiled. Shall we discuss the contract? The table was already set. Documents arranged. A chair waiting for him on the opposite side. She gestured him toward it, and he sat because what else could he do? Because Sierra sat beside him, quiet now, that calculating look in her eyes that Elizabeth had noted from across the room and recognized immediately for what it was. Minji's hands were unsteady as he reached for the contract folder. Elizabeth placed her hand on it first. Before we proceed, she said, I want to make sure everyone in this room understands the situation clearly. She looked at him, not with anger, with something much colder than anger. 3 years ago, I went to a warehouse with $1 million to save your life. I gave up my freedom so a stranger wouldn't have to stay behind alone. You walked out that door. She paused. You never came back. Room had gone still. The people nearby had stopped their own conversations without seeming to realize it. I'm not here tonight to discuss that, she continued. What happened between us is finished. What I'm here to discuss is business. Specifically, the question of whether the KO family will authorize this contract. Minji exhaled slowly. Some color was returning to his face. He thought she was separating the personal from the professional. He thought, even now, that there was a version of this night where he walked out with the contract signed. Elizabeth reached into the folder that had been waiting on the table. She placed the first document in front of him. This is the investigation report commissioned by my family, she said. It documents, in detail, the planning and execution of what happened 3 years ago. She placed another sheet down. This is the financial record showing payments made from an account registered to your current companion to the 3 men who held me captive. Another sheet. These are the communications logs. Sierra's chair scraped back half an inch. You don't have. Shut your mouth, Elizabeth said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The 2 men standing near the door who had been there when they walked in, quiet and unobtrusive, the way her family's people always were, took a step forward. Sierra shut up. The evidence has already been provided to the authorities, Elizabeth said. They're waiting outside. She looked at Minji. He was staring at Sierra. The expression on his face was hard to read, shock, or the slow arrival of something he had refused to look at for a long time. Did you know? He asked her. Sierra said nothing. Did you plan it? His voice cracked. Having her held captive, did you? It doesn't matter what she says right now, Elizabeth said. The documentation speaks for itself. She picked up the contract from the table. She looked at it for a moment, all those pages, all that potential, everything Minji had spent 3 years building toward. She could feel him watching her. She could feel the desperate, silent hope radiating off him, the belief that maybe she would still sign it. That maybe her professionalism would win out. That maybe she would prove she was bigger than what he had done. She tore it in half. She set both halves back on the table. KO family will not be moving forward with this partnership, she said. Every investor who expressed support for your work is hereby asked to withdraw or answer to me. Minji's composure finally broke. He reached across the table, his voice climbing, pleading, saying her name like he had the right to. Like it was a lever that would still work on her. Like she was still the woman who had walked into a warehouse for him and stood at the center of a cold floor and believed he was going to come back. There was no mercy to be given. Everything he had built, the years of work, the reputation, the partnerships, the name he had made for himself was reduced to nothing. By the very woman he had traded for a door that swung quietly shut, she stood, straightened her jacket, and walked to the door. Behind her, she heard him say her name one last time. She heard the sound of the authorities entering from the hallway, quiet, efficient, the way her family always arranged things. She heard Sira's voice rise sharply and then cut off. She didn't turn around. If this story found you, subscribe. Leave a comment. The arrest made the papers the next morning. Businesswoman charged in 3-year captivity conspiracy. The story ran long. It named Minji as the estranged husband of the victim. It mentioned the Kao family only briefly and carefully, the way journalists always mention powerful families, with just enough detail to confirm what readers already suspected, and not one word more. Minji's business partners began calling that same afternoon, not to support him, to quietly, professionally distance themselves. By the end of the week, the deal he has spent 3 years building was gone. The partnerships dissolved. The new investors withdrew. The social circles he and Sira had constructed together, built on her connections, her money, her careful engineering of his rise, collapsed without her at the center. He had nothing that she hadn't, in some way, helped create, and now it was gone. Elizabeth heard all of this. She didn't follow it closely. She had other things to manage. The empire her family had built over 60 years was large and complicated and genuinely demanding in ways she had forgotten during her 15 years away. There was always a contract to review, a meeting to run, a decision that couldn't be delegated. She worked long hours. She learned, relearned, and learned new things. She rebuilt relationships with family associates who had been cautiously loyal during her absence, and were now, she could feel it, genuinely glad she was back. Her father sat with her some evenings and talked about the old days, stories she half remembered from childhood, told better now that she was old enough to understand them. He seemed lighter than she'd seen him in years, relieved, maybe, to have the weight of succession settled. She began to feel, slowly and then more quickly, like herself. Not the version of herself that had existed before the warehouse. Not the girl who had traded all of this for a man who turned out to be a stranger. Something new, built from everything she had been before and everything the last 3 years had made her. It was a harder version and a clearer one. She started taking meetings she had previously sent her father to. She started making decisions that others brought to her as final, rather than passing them upward for confirmation. The family watched her, and what she saw in their faces was not cautious reassessment. It was recognition. She had always belonged here. 6 months after the gala, Elizabeth stood at the window of her office on the top floor of the KO building, looking out over the city. It was early evening, the lights coming on in long lines below, the sky somewhere between blue and black. She thought about the warehouse sometimes. The cold concrete, the sound of the door closing behind Minji. She didn't think about it with grief anymore. It was more like looking at a scar still there, just quiet now. She had gone into that warehouse as someone's wife. She had come out as herself. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A message from her assistant. A dinner with a senator's office confirmed for Thursday. Documents for the quarterly review ready when she had a moment. The family's foundation gala in its final planning stages. She picked up her phone, sent the confirmations, and set it back down. Then she turned from the window, walked back to her desk, and got to work. There was a city beneath that window, and most of it didn't fully understand yet who was running things. They will learn. The next story is already waiting. Hit that subscription button to always stay tuned.